You know that person who drives a Toyota Camry. Not a brand new one, not necessarily an old one either, just a Camry. The kind of car you see everywhere and somehow never really notice. The kind of person who parks between a luxury SUV and a flashy sports car without thinking twice about it. The kind of person who arrives at work, finishes their day, and leaves without ever mentioning what they drive. Everyone knows someone like this. Maybe it's your coworker, maybe it's your neighbor, maybe it's your uncle who somehow makes good money but still drives a Camry that's been around for years. The paint looks fine, the interior looks fine, everything looks fine. Nothing looks exciting, and that's exactly what makes it interesting. Because in a world where people constantly upgrade, constantly compare, constantly signal who they are through what they buy, the Toyota Camry driver often seems strangely unaffected. Why? Why do some people spend enormous amounts of money trying to be noticed while others quietly drive one of the most ordinary cars on the road? At first glance, the answer seems obvious, but psychology suggests something else. And that's where things get interesting. Most people have a theory about Camry drivers. They assume they're practical, boring, risk-averse, maybe even cheap. The stereotype is simple. The Camry driver isn't passionate about cars. They're not trying to impress anyone. They're simply choosing transportation. End of story. But stereotypes are often shortcuts, and shortcuts rarely explain human behavior completely. Because the reality is that very few decisions are ever just about the thing itself. People don't buy houses solely for shelter, they don't buy clothes solely for warmth, and they don't choose cars solely for transportation. Every purchase becomes part of a story, a reflection of identity, a statement about values, a signal of priorities, even when the signal is intentionally quiet. Think about it. Driving an expensive luxury car sends a message, driving an exotic sports car sends a message, even driving an old rusted vehicle sends a message. So, what message does the Camry send? Oddly enough, it may communicate something many people spend their entire lives trying to achieve: psychological security, the feeling that you don't need constant validation from the outside world. Because one of the most powerful forces in human behavior is social comparison. We compare ourselves constantly: income, appearance, careers, homes, relationships, cars. Whether we realize it or not, we're always scanning the environment, asking one silent question: how am I doing compared to everyone else? For some people, that question becomes exhausting. Every purchase becomes a performance. Every upgrade becomes proof. Every visible symbol becomes evidence that they're moving forward. But the Camry driver often appears to be playing a different game. Not necessarily because they're wiser, not necessarily because they're richer, but because they've become less dependent on external confirmation. And that's a subtle but important distinction. Most people never realize this. Confidence doesn't always create flashy behavior. Sometimes it creates the opposite. Sometimes confidence looks surprisingly ordinary. Imagine two people entering a parking lot. One arrives in a vehicle specifically chosen to attract attention. The other arrives in a Camry. Who is more confident? Most people immediately assume the answer. But psychology isn't always that simple, because sometimes highly visible choices are driven by genuine enjoyment, and sometimes they're driven by something deeper: a need to be seen, a need to be admired, a need to reassure yourself of your own success. There's nothing wrong with that. Every human being wants recognition. Every human being wants respect. But the interesting question is this: what happens when someone no longer needs those things as often? What happens when approval stops being the primary fuel source? The answer might look a lot like a Toyota Camry. And this is where things get even deeper, because many Camry drivers aren't making a statement against status. They're simply prioritizing a different kind of status, not visible status. Invisible status, the kind nobody can see: financial flexibility, peace of mind, freedom from unnecessary stress, a larger savings account, a paid-off mortgage, investment accounts nobody talks about. The fascinating thing about human behavior is that people often assume visible wealth equals actual wealth. But those are two completely different things. One can be displayed. The other accumulates quietly. And throughout life, people slowly choose which version matters more to them. That's why you'll sometimes meet someone earning a six-figure income who still drives a Camry. To outsiders, it feels confusing. Shouldn't they have upgraded by now? Shouldn't success look more impressive? But that question reveals something important. Success isn't an objective concept, it's a personal definition, and many people spend years rewriting it. When we're younger, success often means visibility, recognition, achievement that others can see. But as people grow older, something shifts. The scoreboard changes. The things that once felt important begin to lose some of their power. The excitement of impressing strangers starts competing with something else. Peace, convenience, predictability, control. The Camry becomes symbolic of that shift. Not because it's extraordinary, but because it isn't. Think about the people you've known who drive one. Many of them aren't obsessed with making statements. They're obsessed with reducing complications, reducing uncertainty, reducing friction. And that preference extends far beyond cars. It shows up in careers, relationships, finances, daily routines. The car becomes a reflection of a broader philosophy, a desire for stability in a world that often feels chaotic. But here's the strange part. The more stable people become internally, the less pressure they often feel to prove stability externally. That's why some of the wealthiest people you'll ever meet can appear surprisingly ordinary. Not because they lack resources, because they've stopped using resources to communicate identity. Their identity already feels settled. And what does that really mean? It means the conversation is no longer about cars. It's about self-image. Every human being carries an internal picture of who they are. Psychologists sometimes call this a self-concept, but you don't need fancy terminology to understand it. It's simply the story you tell yourself about yourself. I'm ambitious, I'm successful, I'm responsible, I'm respected. The question is whether that story depends on external evidence. Some people need constant reminders, others don't. The Camry driver often falls into the second category. Their self-image isn't reinforced every morning when they walk into the parking lot. It's reinforced somewhere else. Through competence, through relationships, through financial security, through personal values. And because of that, the car doesn't have to do as much psychological work. That's an important idea, because many purchases aren't solving practical problems. They're solving emotional ones. People buy confidence, people buy identity, people buy reassurance, people buy belonging. The object itself is often secondary. What they're really purchasing is a feeling. But if someone already possesses that feeling internally, the pressure to purchase it externally becomes weaker. That's why the Camry occupies such a unique psychological space. It isn't exciting enough to become a status symbol. It isn't cheap enough to become a sacrifice. It sits right in the middle. And psychologically, the middle is often overlooked, yet that's where many people eventually end up. Not chasing more, not rejecting more, just becoming selective about what actually matters. Think about a workplace parking lot. The vehicles tell stories. Some stories are about ambition. Some are about reward. Some are about image. Some are about passion. But the Camry often tells a different story. A story that says, I've thought about this. I know what I value. I don't need this decision to define me. And that's surprisingly rare. Because modern life constantly encourages identity through consumption. Buy this, upgrade that, become this version of yourself. Yet the Camry driver often resists that cycle without consciously trying to. Not out of rebellion, not out of stubbornness, but out of comfort. Comfort with who they already are. And what does this really mean? It means that beneath every discussion about cars lies a deeper human question. How much of your identity depends on being noticed? Because attention is addictive, validation is addictive, comparison is addictive, but eventually many people discover something unexpected. Peace can be addictive too. The peace of not constantly performing, the peace of not constantly competing, the peace of not needing every decision to become a public statement. Maybe that's the hidden psychology of the Toyota Camry driver. Not practicality, not frugality, not boredom, at least not entirely. Maybe it's a quiet confidence, a confidence that doesn't demand witnesses, a confidence that doesn't require applause, a confidence that has slowly detached self-worth from appearances, and in a culture obsessed with visibility, that might be more unusual than driving a luxury car. Because the ultimate status symbol may not be a symbol at all. It may be the freedom to stop needing one. What if enough is enough? What if success doesn't need spectators? What if the strongest form of confidence is knowing who you are without constantly advertising it? Maybe that's why the Toyota Camry remains so fascinating. Not because of the car itself, but because of what it quietly represents. A person who may have discovered that peace is worth more than attention, that stability can feel better than excitement, and that sometimes the most powerful statement is choosing not to make one. So the next time you see a Toyota Camry sitting quietly in a parking lot, look a little closer. You might not be looking at a car, you might be looking at a philosophy. And maybe the real question isn't why they drive a Camry. Maybe the real question is this: how much of your own identity is tied to what other people see?